Hello, everyone. Welcome this afternoon to really privileged and grateful for the opportunity. I'd like to thank the Robert Ho Foundation for bringing Adam Engel to Hong Kong. Welcome all of you to his presentation this afternoon. Adam is the co-founder and the head of the Mind Life Institute, which he founded in the mid-'80s with Francisco Varela and the Dalai Lama. And for the past 30 years or so, they've been at the forefront of studying contemplative studies, kind of this East meets West approach of taking Western methodologies and scientific practices and really studying kind of these Buddhist traditions, I guess, and practices, and really looking at quantifying the results of these practices, and really built the academic community around that's really formed around this work. And so I'd like to warm round of applause to welcome Adam.
Thank you, Gino. And I'd like to, could I convince you to kind of like move up so that we could, have this more of a conversation rather than just a presentation? Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'd like to thank Robert H.M. Ho Foundation for bringing me to Hong Kong, and Gino and his associates for organizing this meeting. I thought what I would do would be to start off by telling you the story of the Mind and Life Institute, how we started, and kind of what our developmental process has been, so that you have an understanding of how we got to where we are, and then describe what it is that we do, and then refocus on why we think this is important, and then leave plenty of time for questions and dialogue, so that we can have more of a discussion about the issues that the work that we do raises. Let me start off by asking a couple of questions just so I get to know. How many people are part of the Hong Kong Poly community, either students, faculty, things like that? Okay, and how many of you engage in some kind of physical fitness practice on a regular basis? And how many engage in any kind of a meditation or contemplative practices, yoga, meditation, stuff like that? So I'm, to some extent, I'm preaching to the choir here about the value of contemplative practices, or what I call mental and emotional fitness practices. But let me just get started, and we'll see where this goes. So the seminal thought behind the founding of the Mind and Life Institute occurred in 1983, when I heard a rumor that the Dalai Lama was interested in science and meeting with scientists. And I had never met the Dalai Lama. I had attended one of his talks in London the year before, but I was a practicing Buddhist, and I still am a practicing Buddhist. And I thought to myself, gee, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if it's true. And then I thought to myself, well, I'm an entrepreneur, and if he really is interested in meeting with scientists, how hard could that be to set up? I could figure out how to do that. And then I thought, gee, maybe I didn't even get to meet him. And so I didn't know him or any of his office or anything like that. But for about a year, whenever I met anyone who knew him or had known about him, I asked, is this rumor true? And everyone said, yeah, he just loves science. And then about a year later, in 1984, I had started a program at the Stanford Business School, and the Dalai Lama was teaching in Los Angeles, and I went down. It was a 2 or 3 day teaching on Buddhism, And just before the teaching began, in the foyer, waiting to get in, someone introduced me to his youngest brother, Tenzin Chogyal, Nari Rinpoche. And it was one of these things where I was shaking his hand, and I just wouldn't let go. And I kept on talking to him about this idea. And he just kind of like, who is this weirdo? And he said, let's meet later. And so we met later on that evening, and I explained what I'd heard and what I was willing to do. And he said, let me go ask. And he went away, and a day or two later he came back to me and he said, yeah, His Holiness says, go for it. And he authorized me to, set up a meeting, and then they introduced me to his secretary. And so I, was authorized to go ahead and set up a meeting. And I thought to myself, well, I'd read the book, The Tao of Physics, by Fritjof Capra, and I figured, well, we'll do something on that. And Fritjof Capra happened to live in Berkeley, California, and I was in Northern California. And I looked him up. I was working with another friend named Michael Sotman at the time. We looked him up, and we talked to him about whether he'd be interested in participating in the meeting and helping us organize the meeting. And he was really lukewarm on the thing. He was kind of burned out at the time on New Age meetings, and he didn't really want to get into another one of those things. And I was just kind of scratching my head, busy in business school. And then one day in early 1985, the phone rang, and it was this guy from Paris calling, and he identified himself as Francisco Varela, and he was a neuroscientist practicing for the French government. He was a researcher for the French government in neuroscience in Europe. And he asked me, he said, I heard that you're trying to put together a meeting with the Dalai Lama, a science meeting. What do you got in mind? And I told him what I had in mind, and he said to me, and I'll never forget, he said, Adam, he says, don't do physics. Physics is a dead science. Do biology, do cognitive science. And I'm a businessman, and finance and stuff like that. I probably heard the words cognitive science, but I didn't really know what it meant. But like any entrepreneur, it's kind of like, well, here's a guy who is a card-carrying scientist who's really interested in this work. So let's talk. Convince me. And so we had a number of conversations. And he was very, very persuasive. And basically, what he pointed out was that a conversation between Buddhism and physics was going to be a very, very theoretical conversation, philosophical conversation. But a conversation between Buddhism and the biological sciences and the sciences of the mind was not only a philosophical conversation, but it actually could get into real sharing of data and perspectives, because the Buddhists don't know anything about how to do research in physics. They've got philosophical ideas about the way the nature of reality is. So I said to him, well, I'll go back to the Dalai Lama's people, because I told them that I was going to do it in physics, and if they say that we can shift it, then we got a deal. And so I went back that summer. Dalai Lama was teaching in outside of Zurich, Kala Chakra, and spoke to his secretary, and everyone said, yeah, that's fine. And it turned out that Francisco had actually met His Holiness earlier, and they had a conversation, an introductory conversation on neuroscience. And so, Francisco and I had started with this idea at about the same time, but we didn't know each other. And so we joined forces and got together in the fall of 1985 and actually decided to work together and put together a meeting. And we had planned the meeting for December of 1986, about a year hence. And we were in the final stages of getting agreement from the private office. We were going to hold it at Stanford University. And then the Dalai Lama got an invitation by the Pope to go to Assisi, and he canceled his visit. And so, we were back to square one. And not only that, what happened was that his secretary changed. And so I had letters, with an old secretary, but I was really, out in the cold. And so during the spring break of my second year in business school, I had a 10-day holiday, and I got on a plane. I went to Dharamsala, and I went to the private office, and I said I wanted to speak to the new secretary, and they sent someone down, and I finally got in front of the secretary, and I showed him my file, and he looked at all this stuff, and he said, I don't know anything about this. I've never heard anything about this. And so I went and I found the Dalai Lama's brother, and he vouched for me and got me an audience with the Dalai Lama, and we got the thing back on track. And it took us another couple of years to manifest the first meeting, which happened in October of 1987, and it was 5 scientists, the Dalai Lama, one sponsor, myself, and a couple of other people in the room. So it was really, really small. It was in a room, about half this size. And it was a 7-day meeting. And it was just fabulous. And so we got to the end of the meeting. I looked at the Dalai Lama and I said, would you want to do it again? And he said, yeah. And so one of the things that had happened that was really, really interesting was that during the meeting, the scientists one scientist was describing her research, her line of research, and the Dalai Lama interrupted her and said, well, what about doing it this way? And her mouth fell open, and she looked at him and she said, Your Holiness, you'd be an excellent scientist, because that's what we thought of next, in this lineage. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. I wonder what would happen if we could get the Dalai Lama in a room with experimental scientists who were actually doing research, and he could kind of like be told what their instruments were, and then maybe talk about the research and come up with some ideas. And we thought about that for the next meeting, which happened in 1989, and it didn't quite happen that way. But what was notable about that meeting was that the meeting, I think, was on a Thursday and Friday, and I got woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning before the meeting. And I picked up the phone in the hotel room, and someone said, have you heard? And I said, what are you talking about? I said, they just announced in Oslo that His Holiness has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And the Norwegian ambassador is in town, and he's going to meet with His Holiness at 8 o'clock in the morning to inform him about this and give him the award. Is the meeting still going to happen? And I said, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But to His Holiness's credit, he dealt with that, and we started about a half an hour late and kept on to our schedule, which is an indication of how important this is to him. One of the things that I had said to his brother when I had asked him whether His Holiness really wanted to do this was, I couldn't basically say, ask him whether he really wants to do it, but I said, I want you to ask him specifically, A, whether he will agree to be fully present in whatever meetings we set up. That I'm not interested in doing this if he's just going to give a keynote and then leave. And second, could we use his name in fundraising if we needed to? And they came back and agreed to all of that. And so, over what we realized, and this basically came from Francisco, was that science is the dominant paradigm for understanding the nature of reality in modern society and providing a knowledge base for improving people's lives. And Buddhism, while it is a path of liberation, it's not based on theology or belief. It's also based on understanding the nature of reality and providing a knowledge base for improving people's lives. The difference is the instruments or the instrumentalities of investigation. Science proves itself through the scientific method, third person, objective investigation. And Buddhism uses the human nervous system as its instrument of investigation and refines that through meditative techniques, and then uses the first person perspective, the subjective experience of what's going on to investigate the nature of reality, while Western science is looking from the outside, objective supposedly, looking at the nature of reality. And so the idea was that by developing these dialogues and this string of dialogues, if we could, our hypothesis was that if we could find a way for these two very, very powerful but very, very different systems of knowing to be in dialogue, share their findings, and collaborate, that society would benefit, that humanity would benefit. And one of the things that Francisco was really very, very tuned into, because he came to Buddhism through neuroscience, and realizing that neuroscience wasn't really fully answering some of the questions he had about how the mind works. And it was because of the limitation of this third person approach, which is a very, very effective approach of investigation if you're investigating something that is relatively inanimate, or you're investigating cellular structures or things like that. But if you really wanted to understand the nature of experience, you've got to develop a way of investigation that joins the third person investigation with the first person subjective experience, which up until now has been a taboo in psychological research and neuroscience research, because their data has shown that when you try and correlate the first person reports of their internal subjective experience with the third person data, that there's not a great correlation. People are not aware of their internal processes, so that they can accurately report what's going on. And so I'm getting a little bit ahead of the story, but I'll touch into that because an important aspect of what Mind and Life has become is this approach toward investigating the mind, which is an integrated approach. Not just third person, not just first person, but first, second, and third person. Second person being the dialogue between third and first person. And it's an integrated approach for investigating the mind, which is really the only way that we can understand, hopefully, how the mind works, so that we can develop understandings of how to develop a healthier and happier mind. So over the last I'm losing track of my time here. The last, up until now, we just completed our 23rd science dialogue with the Dalai Lama. Let me back up for a second. We did 7 or 8 dialogues over the ensuing 10 years, and we got to about 1998. And I was doing this as an avocation. I was still involved in the business world, and I started getting a little bit nervous with the fact that here we were holding these meetings. The Dalai Lama was really engaged. It looked like he was going to be engaged for another decade or two, but I wasn't seeing a lot of societal benefit from these dialogues. We would have the dialogues. The people in the room would have a great time. We'd publish a book maybe 5 years later. And who cares? So what? Is this it? So by that point, I had assembled an academic advisory board, and I asked them, Francisco and the rest of the board, to come together. There were 6 or 8 people in Boston in 1998. And I posed that question. I said, let's assume that the Dalai Lama is involved in this for another decade or 2. Are we maximizing the societal benefit of this interchange? Or is there something else that we should be doing? I don't want to get another 10 years down the road and then have someone come along and say, you really blew this opportunity. You should have been doing something else. And they said, this is an excellent question. And from our point of view as academics and as scientists, you can hold all the meetings in the world and publish all the books in the world, but if you want to have any lasting impact in the world of science, science proves itself through rigorous studies, the results of which are published in peer-reviewed journals. And if you want to have an impact, that's what you should be doing. So like any entrepreneur, I said, great, let's do that. What do we have to do in order to do that? And Francisco said, well, I'll start some studies in my lab. Richie said he'd start some in his lab. Someone said, we ought to choose topics for our dialogues that lead at least to tractable hypotheses that we can investigate. And so, we kind of left that meeting with an intention. We brought this to the Dalai Lama, and he really, really liked this approach. And the first meeting that we had under this new area, this new idea, was in 2000, the meeting on destructive emotions. And many of you may have read that book that was narrated by Dan Goldman. And in that meeting, the Dalai Lama came in and he said, after we'd spoken about research, so he was kind of primed, he said, it seemed to him that Buddhism and the other contemplative traditions have developed practices that really help people improve their lives. And he asked the scientists in the room whether they would find ways to investigate those practices in their laboratories to determine whether in fact they were beneficial, using their notions of benefit and harm, and then if they turned out to be beneficial, to find ways to teach them in a purely secular environment. So, and this was at a time, in the late 90s when he was just releasing Ethics for a New Millennium, which is his book talking about secular ethics. And so this folded right into his approach of, his bodhisattva approach of benefiting all humanity. And for people that are not involved in any kind of religious tradition, what do they use? What tools can be provided to them to help them live happier and healthier lives? And so we really started in earnest in the year 2000 to try and figure out how to develop research in this area. And Francisco suggested that we hold a large public meeting, that we modify our format and have a public meeting to bring more people into awareness of what we were doing, because we were a well-kept secret in those days. And so we scheduled a meeting, a public meeting for 2003. And then I started really thinking about this as an entrepreneur, and I said, well, if we're really trying to do research, that means a multi-generational project. I mean, because research isn't really convincing unless you've got decades of replicable studies. So what do you need in order to do that? Well, you need academics, scientists, and other academics who want to do this research. And when you pierce down into that, what you realize is you have to get young people at the beginning of their careers interested in this field, this new area, because people who are in the middle of their careers already have their research agendas and their funding sources, and they're not going to make a right turn. The people at the top of their careers, like Richie Davison and Francisco, have some flexibility, but there aren't enough of them to really matter in terms of the sum total of research. So young people, and then you have to find a way to link them up with reliable streams of funding so that they can choose this as a career path. And that means getting funding from government sources. But in order to do that, you have to develop pilot data that shows that there is a promise of benefit before you can get meaningful sums committed by governments to these areas. So based on that thinking, we also augmented our strategy, which now consisted of private meetings with the Dalai Lama, large public meetings when we had a reason to have them, and then we established a program that we called the Mind and Life Summer Research Institute in 2004, which is a week-long educational program for scientists and academics and contemplatives to learn how to do this collaborative research between scientists and the contemplative world. And then we augmented that with a pilot study program, or grant program, where we gave originally $10,000 grants, and now they're up to $15,000 grants to applicants who had been to the Summer Research Institute. And those are granted on a competitive basis. So up until, and then in the year 2006, we also launched a research network on, to look at the question of whether the idea is that if contemplative practices are good and beneficial, then wouldn't it be a good idea to start them earlier in life? So what we call it the Mind and Life, we called it the Mind and Life Education Research Network, but now it's been renamed as the Mind and Life Developmental Science Research Network. What's the earliest age at which you could start a contemplative-based program with a child? What is the initial program that would work? And what is the developmental sequencing of how those programs could be developed, and start people earlier in life? So today, In 2011, we've done 23 dialogues with the Dalai Lama. Some of them have been private dialogues in Dharamsala, some have been large public dialogues. We've had 8 summer research institutes and had about 1,500 people go through those summer research institutes. We've given away about $1.2 million in research grants, totaling about 100 grants, and that has resulted in $30 million in $30 to $50 million in follow-on funding. And we've essentially, from a situation in the year 2000 where there were very, very few, if any, first-rate academic researchers studying contemplative practices. Today there are hundreds of scientists and academics around the world, and there's dozens of centers. And we're punctuating, and we've named these fields contemplative neuroscience, the effect of contemplative practices on the brain, contemplative clinical sciences, the effect of these practices on behavior and the prevention and treatment of disease and health and well-being, and contemplative education. And the other area that's also ready to pop is in the leadership and workplace area. How do you develop programs that can be implemented in the workplace? And the idea is that the big vision here is that we want using the same model that we've seen effective in physical fitness, where you've got scientific demonstration of health and well-being effects, positive health and well-being effects from physical fitness, stimulating a very, very robust physical fitness industry, so that in most modern societies now, access to physical fitness programs are ubiquitous in a lot of life situations. Using that model in the same area, or in an area that I call mental and emotional fitness. So showing that these programs, based on contemplative interventions, but modified for modern society, actually can increase attention, emotional balance, confidence, kindness, health, and well-being. And that will stimulate a robust mental and emotional fitness industry. And the goal is that there's a planetary awareness of the value of this mental and emotional fitness, and then a wide range of age-appropriate and culturally appropriate mental and emotional fitness training tools that everyone has access to in their lifestyle. And so, the idea is to start with the traditional contemplative practices, and then investigate, what the active ingredients are and dose-response relationships, and figure out how to mold those so that they are much more amenable to modern society. Because the traditional delivery systems, with long-term retreats and different things, don't fit into a lot of modern lives. And through an iterative process, figure out how to do this, and also fold in technological advances, and how technology can act as an aid toward promoting progressive planetary awareness. And so that's basically what we've done up until now with the Mind and Life Institute. And I'd like to focus a couple of minutes and then open it up for a dialogue on why we think this is an important thing to do. And fundamentally, from an individual point of view, we all want to be healthier and we all want to be happier in our lives. We want to have happy lives, and we do a lot of things in order to be happy. But in the West, primarily in the United States, we've created this societal myth that if we've got any dissatisfaction in our lives, we can cure that dissatisfaction by changing the outside world. By making more money, by getting new degrees, by getting a bigger house, getting a different car, getting a better spouse or something like that. And we've optimized all of our educational institutes and our other institutes toward training ourselves and our culture on how to change the outside world. And in that process, we've let atrophy internal development and internal growth and internal resiliency. And we've also established as part of this myth that if we have any suffering in our lives, any anger and things like that, it's the outside world that's doing it to us. You know, that we're victims of what happens. And one of the examples that I give as to, you know, how that's not true is let's assume that you've got a brand new car, you know, whatever your favorite car is, and you park it in the parking lot, and then you come out and someone has taken a key and just scraped the side of it, you know, and you're absolutely livid, and you're absolutely convinced that that scratch has created your anger. But the problem with that is that if that was true, if it was that scratch that was causing the anger, everyone who looked at it would have the same reaction. But that isn't what happens. So the scratch is definitely a trigger, but we bring something to that in order to create the anger. You know, we bring our predisposed attitude for not having it there. And that's the part that we have not really focused on in modern education. And it's the internal piece that actually is much, much more responsible for long-lasting states of happiness than the temporary pleasure that we get from getting more stuff. You know, and then the other part. Oops. The other part of this is that if you're on this cycle of, you know, just getting more stuff, you know, it gets to be really time-consuming and exasperating, and there's never really enough. So that's a personal reason why this is important. From a societal reason, let me just say that, you know, getting more stuff is kind of an evolutionary imperative. You know, since the beginning of time, you know, the game of more for me, more for us, really was a key towards survival. You know, because if you could stockpile, you know, you had a better shot at surviving than if you didn't. The problem with that is, on a societal basis now, with 7 to 10 billion people playing more for me, more for us, at the same level that we're playing it in the United States, that's a recipe for extinction, not survival. So we've got to figure out a different way of finding our satisfaction in life. And then the other thing to think about is that if you look at the societal problems that we've got right now and the global problems that we're facing, wars, terrorism, environmental degradation, injustices of all sorts, financial collapses and stuff like that, virtually all of these are man-made problems. They've come from our own minds. And we're not going to fix that situation just by addressing the outside world, unless we also address the underlying attitudes that have created the problems in the first place. So in our view, this idea of increasing awareness and wisdom and working to create healthier and happier minds is an absolutely critical part of our individual happiness and well-being, and also our societal and planetary survival even. So, with that, I'd like to, pause right here and open it up for questions, and invite my colleagues, Gino and Jeffrey, to join me, and just have a dialogue now about. I'll answer any questions about what I've said, and we can start sharing some ideas about this area.
Great. Any questions?
Hi. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was curious to know how the scientists were chosen. Is it because they had interest? And did the scientists themselves have any spiritual practices? Or did they then adopt spiritual practices after the encounter with the Dalai Lama?
Well, the way that we choose our academics for the dialogues with the Dalai Lama And we put a lot of care into this. We basically start with a topic, like the last one that we did was on the environment. And then we put together a small planning committee of people that we are either on the board or through our network close to the organization, or people that we invite in. So in this case, Dan Goldman, who had written a book on what do you call it, environmental intelligence, and John Dunn, who is a Buddhist scholar, and we invited in Jonathan Patz, who is a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize with Al Gore. And then we put together an outline of how we think the days will flow on a topical basis. And then once we've got that, then we look for world experts who can represent those particular topics. And then we invite them, and then we also have a pre-planning meeting where everyone gets together for 3 days, a couple of months before the meeting with the Dalai Lama, and goes through the presentations and gets to know one another, so we don't just walk into the meeting kind of cold. That's how we choose the dialogue partners for those meetings. The Summer Research Institute is by application, and people can apply, and then we go through an evaluation process based on the applicants that we've got. And in order to apply for that, you have to basically give a bio sketch and a short essay and a letter of recommendation from your mentors. And then with the international symposia, I forgot to mention this. The marker for the establishment of these fields of contemplative is that we're launching in April of 2012 something that we're calling the International Symposia for Contemplative Studies, which is going to be in Denver, close to where we live in Boulder. This is designed to be the global international information sharing and networking opportunity for this newly established field of research, and that's open to anyone who wants to come. I would say that everyone who attends a dialogue with the Dalai Lama is changed. Whether they get engaged in contemplative practices, I'm not sure. We haven't done any follow-up on that. But it certainly, over the years, some people become closer through to our organization and remain and have been invited on the board or elsewhere. Others just take it and disseminate it out into the world. And also we started with scientists primarily in North America and Europe, but from a strategic basis, we've identified the primary research axis for the coming decades as being North America, Europe, India, and Asia. And so we last year held our first public meeting in Zurich, and just last week, we convened a small gathering to try and figure out what our ongoing strategy for developing these fields in Europe will be. And then we also held a meeting in New Delhi last year. And we from that meeting, we got 6 or 7 people who came to our Summer Research Institute last summer, and they're the nucleus around which we're going to build our India strategy. We tried to hold the Mind and Life meeting in Japan around 2006 or so, but what we found was that at that point in time, we couldn't find a reputable Japanese education institute that would co-sponsor the meeting with us, which is part of our public meeting DNA. Every public meeting that we do in partnership with a mainstream academic institution. And we've done that with MIT, Johns Hopkins University, Georgetown, Zurich, the Institute for Advanced Studies in Delhi. Because of their relationship with China and China's adverse relationship with the Dalai Lama, no one really wanted to get involved in that point in time. And so I basically went back to the Dalai Lama and said, let's take a breather on this, and we're going to have to figure out a way to develop an Asian strategy that doesn't include you. And we actually just talked about that a couple of weeks ago in Dharamsala, and he thinks that maybe Japan might have changed by now, and so we're going to take another run at it. But one of the things that I'd like to explore while I'm here is how we could establish a mind and life type meeting that doesn't include the Dalai Lama, in Hong Kong or Taiwan or something like that.
Hong Kong, that'd be great. I think we'd all be supportive of it, yeah?
Adam, just a quick question. You talked about mental and emotional health earlier to supplement physical health. Is there a role in there for spiritual health, or is there a separate distinction?
Well, that's a good question. I came up with that language, and one of the ways that I work is I trial things. I think about these things and then try them out. And this isn't language that has been fully adopted by the board of the Mind and Life Institute, because the academics really it's a little bit too practical for them. But the whole idea of spiritual is something that I'm not really sure what it's a word that means different things to just about everyone. And there's such a buzz around spirituality in the United States. Everyone's trying to be spiritual, and it's just gotten so there's a lot of baggage associated with the word, and so I just not wanted to go there, as an introductory thing. But obviously, if you think about spirituality and the way that I think about spirituality, because I've asked a lot of people, what do you mean? What is spirituality? And Alan Wallace, I think he's been here and he's talking, and he gave me a good definition a number of years ago, or a definition that I really thought was insightful. He says, it's really the pursuit of looking for happiness and fulfillment from within, rather than in relation to what's out there. And from that sense, that's the entire game, really.
I didn't mean to be cutting fine hairs with that question.
Yeah.
The other piece was around the practical applications of mindfulness and awareness study as it relates to people who are not presently engaged with philosophical practices, and how to be able to get it out there in a pragmatic way at scale.
Yeah.
In specific communities, whether it's athletic communities, whether it's professional communities, or it would seem that may be one way to push it as an agent of change.
Yeah. Well, the approach that I've taken to that is that and again, it comes from my business background, and that is that people have come to us and basically said, you're developing all of this understanding. You should also develop applications. Well, my response to that is, first of all, it's a totally different business. That's a training and it's a curriculum development and training business that we don't know anything about. We don't have any expertise in that. The second thing is that it puts, if we had our own wares, it compromises our position as impartial researchers, and puts us in conflict with other applications developers. And the third thing is that being a good market capitalist, the way I am, I think that we get better market penetration by unleashing all of the entrepreneurial talents of the world and letting them develop the applications, and then we can become the evaluators and assessors as to whether they're working or not. So what I'm trying to do is to stimulate a robust mental and emotional fitness industry that is way beyond what people are thinking about right now. And I was just recently in San Francisco, and a guy showed me an iPhone app that has been developed, and it's in beta testing or something like that, where you set up this thing, you press a button, and the light on the back of the iPhone comes on, and you put your finger over it, and it takes your pulse, and then it calibrates something called heart rate variability, which is a marker of stress, and then it gives you a stress score, and then it converts it into a breathing pattern so that you can look at this thing and it shows you when to inhale and when to exhale, and it can lower your stress levels.
That's actually the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of stuff that's going on, or that can go on, and if we get over our prejudices as to the way it should be, and just basically let it rip, and then start evaluating it, seeing whether it works.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is really a question, but I've just made some observations. Maybe you can comment on. But whatever word we use, we might not want to use the word spirituality because, in a sense, we're trying to take the fruits of a spiritual practice and secularize it. But just like in the mindfulness movement in cognitive behavior therapy, they de-transcendentalize mindfulness by teaching the practice,
Right.
and not talking too much about where it comes from really. Oh yeah, the Buddha started, like a sentence. But the fact is that whatever you call it, once people do a contemplative practice, they are more likely to access the superconscious. And not only the superconscious, but they're more likely to access the unconscious. And so, as a clinical psychologist, I have people coming to me who have gone on various types of retreats involving, Kundalini and just normal meditation, and they're having various levels of spiritual emergency involving dissociative states or just not really knowing who they are anymore. It seems there is an interaction sometimes of this thinning of the boundary between consciousness and superconsciousness, if you believe in that, which I think most of us do have a practice, and the unconscious, which we all pretty much believe in. And you can't just thin one of them. When you thin the one between consciousness and superconsciousness, you're thinning the one between conscious and unconscious, and if there's unresolved stuff there, it comes up. And so this has implications for training people in meditative practices. I'm involved in programs to teach mindfulness in the schools, but in a way, you almost need a kind of informed consent when you're teaching people something that comes from a spiritual school, not mentioning spirituality, not mentioning superconsciousness, not mentioning metachoric states of consciousness, which are hallucinatory, whether or not they correspond with actual, external reference. So anyway, just interested in comments. All that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we talk about at the Summer Research Institute is being transparent about the whatever negative side effects may occur, and alerting people to them. And it also, it's my personal view that traditional contemplative practices can be very effective for certain areas, but I know a lot of people who've been doing a lot of formal sitting practices, but without modern psychotherapy, there are certain things that just don't get unraveled and dealt with. It can be an avoidance. And this is one of the objections or the real concerns that I've got with the movement right now, is that a lot of this research has been done on the MBSR program because it was the one program, contemplative-based program, where you can get standardized cohorts and standardized programs. And so researchers, in order to research things, they need a cohort and some idea of that there's a standardized program there. So they've done a lot of that stuff. And the whole MBSR community is all about mindfulness, and John Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness and stuff like that. The problem is that is that mindfulness is a specific practice that is primarily a calm abiding practice, to calm the mind, but it doesn't necessarily build compassion and wisdom. It's not really designed for that. There are other practices that do that. And if the promise is that mindfulness will get you everywhere that you need to go, that's just not true. And a lot of people are believing that and propagating that. And I think that that's a danger.
So it's a basket.
Say again?
It's a basket.
Yeah, I mean, the word meditation is very, very misunderstood. And in the West, we think of it as, if someone says meditation, you think of someone, putting their body into a pretzel form and kind of like zoning out, but it would be the same, but what it really translates from, what they tell me is, if you look at the Sanskrit and Tibetan words, what it really translates to is familiarization and cultivation. And it's about familiarizing yourself with how your mind works. And it's a wide variety of programs. It'd be the same as saying that all physical fitness was running. And it's not. I mean, there's a whole range depending on what you're trying to do. And it's the same thing with all of, that's why I call it mental and emotional fitness. There's a wide range of programs that can be, and some of the traditional programs are amenable to secularization, and others are not. They're too steeped in like mantra mandala visualizations. It's going to be hard to find a secular way of doing something like that. Although, there are NLP techniques, that essentially, visualize an anchor. So.
Hi, I've got several questions.
Thank you.
The first one is, how would you assess your experience, meeting with the Dalai Lama, from a personal level? That's the first one. Second, you mentioned that people who have come in touch with Dalai Lama have experienced some kind of change, and what kind of change has affected you personally. Third one, do you do any kind of practices yourself?
Well, my experience with the Dalai Lama has, I've been in close contact with him now for 2.5 decades, and so my relationship with him has changed, from the first meeting until the last time I saw him a couple of weeks ago, and so it's hard for me to But what I can say is that on a personal basis, when I spent a number of years being really conflicted between the way that I held spirituality and the way that I manifested in the material world, because I was raised, to be a full-bore materialist, and that the be-all and end-all of life was building material wealth and a material life. And then I got involved in this spiritual stuff first in the late 60s and early 70s, and I didn't really know what to make of it. But what drew me in was that, this feeling of kindness and compassion when I was around the Tibetan Lamas that I was introduced to in the mid-70s. I started learning about Buddhism and doing some of the practices and stuff like that. And so for a number of years, I would kind of use my Buddhist practice to keep me kind of sane while I was out doing battle in the material world. And it was like I was using the spiritual practice to kind of prop up my material pursuits in the world. And what I noticed in the year after I first met the Dalai Lama was that without any fanfare or magic or big aha, that my whole framework inverted. And whereas before I saw the spiritual as propping up my ability to pursue my material goals, what I saw was that the material world was just a support system for me to pursue, my self-fulfillment. And that was a very, very powerful inversion for me. A lot more so than any of the individual experiences that I've had of being with him in his presence, which have varied from, just being in incredibly blissful states to, being in situations where he's criticized me for one thing or another. I've become kind of a family member in a lot of ways, so we go through stuff that, is just like you go through with your brother or something like that. As far as my own practice is concerned, I do engage in practice on a continuous basis. One of the things that I haven't done long retreats or things like that. My teachers talk in terms of there's meditation and then post-meditation, and it's really about just continually trying to be aware of what's going on with me, and seeing when I'm triggered, really familiarizing myself with how my body-mind works, and trying to become a saner and a kinder and a better person.
Can I ask you to introduce yourself real quick before a question? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Melina Archishevsky, and I was hoping that you could share an example of research results that you're especially excited about.
The first thing to say is that a lot of this research is in its infancy. A lot of it hasn't really been replicated, but I think one of the things that has been particularly interesting and demonstrative is the impacts of mindfulness meditation on attention. And there's a phenomenon called the attentional blink, where and this line of experimentation has gone on thousands and thousands of times. And what they discovered is that if you show someone a series, either visually or auditorily, of a series of inputs, like numbers, you just flash numbers at them, and then you flash a letter, that letter kind of stimulates what they call an attentional blink, and you're actually blind to what happens right after it. And then it recovers, and then you can start recognizing things. And they vary the number of milliseconds that you're blind for. And Richie Davidson and his team a few years ago did some work with people who were engaged in 90-day meditation retreat, Theravada meditation retreat. And I think that their data showed that every single, and by the way, with all of the studies that had been done, no one had found a way to shorten the attentional blink to the point where people were thinking that it was hardwired in. And with this study that Richie did, every single subject that participated in this meditation retreat was able to significantly shorten the attentional blink. So there's a lot of data that shows that this meditation process can improve your ability to attend. That's one area.
My name is Timothy Jones, and I'm a professor here at PolyU in the School of Design, and I'm also a yoga instructor. And recently, my teacher was talking to me about how there's so many the rise of yoga, and how millions and millions and millions of people are doing it, and yet there are scholars who say there's not a great shift in the world, and it's kind of resonated with me, and I've been thinking about it, because for me, I know what it's done for me personally, but I agree that if you look at all the people doing yoga, Hong Kong, I teach yoga, and then I'll walk through the streets and I see my students, they're living their lives doing what people do, and it's an interesting thing. So how do you make sure that the work that is actually being done actually translates into something for people?
Well, that's a really good question. It's been something that it's really captivated my interest over the last couple of years, because not being a scientist myself, the reason that I'm involved in this is because I'm primarily a social activist and involved in social justice, and the paradigm or the logic model that I've been involved in is that again, looking at my own life and how my contemplative practices have changed my life and the way that I manifest in the world. The idea is that if more people practice, then more people will change and we'll get social change. And I've been looking at the same thing that you're looking at. And at best, it's a very long process. And while we are developing data that shows that practice can result in individual benefits and health and well-being benefits and stress reduction and dealing with pain and attentional things and stuff like that, there's no data that shows that any of that translates into social change. And so I've been thinking about, is there a way to shorten that process? And I ask myself, is there a contemplative practice out there that more directly would result in social change? And the idea that I've come up with, I haven't done anything about it yet, is kindness. Kindness is a spiritual practice, which according to the literature, the more kind acts you do, the better you feel personally. And so I've talked to a few people about this idea, and I've just fantasized about it, and I throw it out to you. Maybe you've got some ideas as well. And the idea is that with social networking and electronic communication, and I read about Facebook having 500 million people that are connected up to Facebook, and it's like if we could communicate the phrase that I use, kindness is cool, and get a whole generation of people really buying into doing kind stuff just for the hell of it, just because it's cool, and what would that look like? And could that movement build in some kind of significant way? And but I think it's an excellent question, it's very complicated, because as in the yoga movement, there's millions and millions of people that are doing it, but most of the studios are set up as basically stretching. It's a modern day jazzercise. And their business model is to sell stuff rather than to, be a real, inwardly spiritual practice. So that's a complicating factor as well. So, what I come back to is, let's just stimulate a whole lot of activities. It'll be confusing for a while, but hopefully it'll sort itself out, and we'll get a wiser and saner culture. And everything is going in that direction. One school of thought is that it's an evolutionary process. There's one of our sponsors, and a good friend of mine, who's just released a book called Ego, The Fall of the Twin Towers and Planetary Enlightenment. And he sees it as an evolutionary movement where there was a pre-personal and then a personal, and we're going into a post-personal. But the fact remains is that more people are talking, about awareness and increasing awareness now than have ever been talking about it before. And there's always this idea, this dream of 100th monkey effect, where there'll be a tipping point at some point in time. We're all moving toward a collective global awareness. And how do we stimulate that happening? The bottom line is that all of our institutional frameworks, are unsustainable. We're either going to figure out a way to increase our awareness to change this stuff, or we're not going to be around very much longer. And The other thing that I think a lot about is how we can retrain ourselves from opting for short-term pleasure, shifting from that to choosing a long-term beneficial solution. And I just look at situations in my own life where I'm continually knowing that I should be doing this to maximize long-term pleasure and choosing this. And what's that mechanism like? And how do you shift that on a mass scale?
My name is Doug Seiden. I'm an adjunct professor here, but I'm mainly a clinical psychologist in private practice. But just in reaction to that question, sorry, Timothy, the thing that came to mind when you asked that question was something that Iyengar said in Light on Life, that if you're just doing the asanas, you're not really doing yoga. So,
Right.
So you might look at the 100 million people doing yoga, but they're not doing yoga if they're doing the asanas because they don't have the yama, they don't have the niyama. It's like being a Jew or Christian and not obeying the 10 commandments. I mean, there's the 8 limbs of yoga, and asanas by themselves are just calisthenics. And that's the same danger with mindfulness, I think, or with Tibetan dream yoga or anything. You can use it for relaxation, but then you're not really, are you really doing it if you're doing it for relaxation, or are you doing what one author said, you're trying to light a campfire with rocket fuel? Like, yeah, you light it, but you're going to get some unexpected results.
Adam, very quickly, we've been talking about all this materialism, and as you're probably aware that India and China are on this amazing curve of materialism, and I am going to India next week, and I've been invited to attend a conference on rural development and education and happiness. In India, we supposedly are considered happy people, but now this materialism has become so rampant that people are actually forgetting what real happiness is, and they're trying to ape the West. So as a Westerner, what would your message be to the people who know the underlying notion of happiness but are now forgetting it? And they want materialism, and they want happiness through materialism. How could we actually bring them back to the core of what happiness is?
Well, it's a really, really good question. And I think that I have a couple of thoughts. A lot of this has to do with where you are in the economic and the material ladder. I think that one of the notions that I thought about decades ago is that there's a real big difference between subsistence and what I call psychological subsistence. So for people who are close to subsistence, I think that you're never going to have any kind of real impact in trying to convince them that materialism is going to spoil their lives. Because if you don't have clean water and you don't have health care and if you don't have a decent place to live and that kind of stuff, I think materialism really does add to the quality of your life. I think that the efforts really have to be focused on the people who have abundant lives, and really ask, and that's where the internal inquiry of just becoming aware of the fact that the message is that, and just watching yourself. I mean, I watch myself when something new comes into my life, and I feel that moment of elation, and then I see how transitory it is. And do you really want to be on this cycle of getting those little hits? It's like being a cocaine junkie. You just got to keep on buying shit. And the dominant message is is that if anything is if you've got any dissatisfaction in your life, you can cure it by buying something. You know, but what they don't tell you is until you own it, and then you got to get something else. And is that the way you want to live your life? Is just engineering everything and building into your life the instrumentalities so that you can just keep on getting more and more and more and more. And what really complicates it is that we've got very, very sophisticated industries that have vested interests in trying to keep you locked into that paradigm and are bombarding you constantly with those messages. You know, and those ads that we all are bombarded with, promise of, these subtle promises of sexual fulfillment, if we buy Wrigley's gum, or hitting our fear buttons, that we're not going to be enough unless we've got, something else. That's part of the mix as well. So it's a really complicated kind of a thing. And you know what? It's complicated. And I think it's kind of at the root of what this whole Occupy movement is that's spreading around the world now. I mean, because it's essentially what's happening, if you use the United States as an example, is that we're creating a neo-feudalistic society where everything is being optimized for the benefit of modern-day nobility. Same as in the feudal system, except the modern-day nobility are the owners. And you've got different levels, the very, very rich are the kings and the queens and the, dukes and stuff like that. And, the middle class are, lower level barons and, public servants and stuff like that. And then there's the serfs. And everything is being optimized, for that kind of a structure. And fundamentally, what we're losing sight of is what does it really mean to be human? And that's really the question. Is being human just about getting more stuff? Or is there something else?
So what, in your opinion, is the best way to address this question?
It depends on who you're talking to. It's not the one thing that is absolutely very, very clear to me, and is that it's not one size fits all, and it never will be.
See, I think if mass media has played such an important role in making us unfulfilled and till we have this material desire fulfilled, do you think mass media can play a similar role in spreading this message too?
It could, but it won't. Because you're not going to get the kind of change that we need on a top-down basis. The people who are controlling, the society right now are too invested in the status quo to voluntarily change like that. But what is happening is that through peer-to-peer media, communication, I've been told that in the United States right now, approaching 50% of the population doesn't get their news any longer from mass media, and that's really going to be the salvation. Look at what's going on in the Occupy Wall Street thing.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the difference between the publicity that the Tea Party gets, which is a minuscule, on a numbers basis, it's a it's 1/20th, 1/30th, 1/100th of the popular support of the Occupy movement, and yet, it gets, credible mass media when, the Occupy movement just gets pissed all over in the press, and discounted and, splinterized and stuff like that.
So the wave is starting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Unrelated question. So Kelly Larson and I research yoga, Center for the Study of Yoga and Health. And so one of my questions for you, looking at a lot of research, yoga obviously is an umbrella for a lot of different practices, including meditation. So I'm familiar with the fact that meditation research is generally much more, the research design is much more solid in general than most other yoga research, asana research. So two of my interests, I guess, as at the Center for the Study of Yoga and Health is looking at improving the quality of that research and also getting it out to the public. So what I'd like to hear from you, being so steeped in the meditation research, is what would you say are one or two major things that are sort of the next step for either improving or taking meditation research to the next level? And also, what's being done or can be done to bring that more out to the public, the benefits of meditation?
So the first question is, what can be done to, to improve the
Quality of research, or or what's the next step if you feel like it's already?
Well, it's an iterative process. I think that there are a couple levels to answer it. I think that the primary thing that has to be kept in mind in terms of this research paradigm is that the researcher has to ideally be involved in calibrating the instrument of investigation, which is their own mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the research has to be a true collaboration between the researchers and the contemplatives, because the researchers kind of know what to measure or how to measure things. They don't know what to measure. And without that collaboration and the guidance from the contemplatives, so in meditation research, the most successful research happens, with long dialogues between, between Richie Davidson and Matthew Ricard, where they really talk about, okay, these are the kinds of things that you can measure, but how should you apply this? And then, Matthew participates in the development of the protocol, and then they trial it together. And then, he recruits the cohort and helps interpret the results. It's a real collaboration. And, this is something that we have to keep on reinforcing as a methodology. It's now being applied more toward yoga, through the Kapalo, efforts at Kapalo, and there's something called, yoga therapists, research, and those people are coming to the international symposium. We're trying to reach out and figure out how to take the measures that have been established in mindfulness meditation, apply them to yoga studies as well, and Tai Chi, and Qigong, and other types of practices. How to get it out into the public. The proposal that I've given to the Mind and Life Board as our phase 3 development is, now that we've gotten some traction in the academic community, and that will be going on. How do we remain relevant? And part of it is we've up until now we have consciously focused our communication on the academic community and not on the general public, because in the academic community, if you're trying to build credibility for research thread, one of the worst things that you can do is overpromise on the data. And so there's a tremendous bias toward conservatism, and not getting out ahead of the data. And even insiders like Daniel Goleman, who is a very, very close friend of Richie Davidson and stuff like that. He writes popular books interpreting science, and he gets criticized from the scientists misstating the data and stuff like that. I think that my personal feeling is that there's enough momentum now in the research community, and enough scientific papers that are being circulated back and forth, that we can take greater risks in trying to interpret the data and trying to publicize it to the general population. And it's a bold move, and the pace at which that happens will probably grow over time. But there is a bias toward being conservative and not overpromising.
Any other questions? Not one last one would be, I'm really excited to hear about the plans for Asia, and in terms of what you guys have done for Europe, in terms of organizing a gathering of stakeholders to come up with a plan for Europe, is that going to be the strategy for Asia, or how do you see kind of stimulating the Asian researchers developing in the coming couple months or year ahead?
Well, that's a really good question. What we've done, there have been different approaches in Europe and in India. We've attracted a number of European investigators to the Summer Research Institute over the last 8 years, and so and we've got a head of international who's a Swiss, and we established a international division in Switzerland. We've actually got one in Switzerland and one in Canada now. And so what I asked Diego to do is to do something similar to what I did in the United States or in North America with the collaborative coordinator effort. And that is to look through the people who have been to our summer research institutes and who have participated in our European-based meetings and other meetings, and then convene a group and then just listen to what they really think is necessary. Rather than, one idea was that we would take the Summer Research Institute and start holding it in Europe every third year or something like that. Well, someone that I spoke to said, that's not really necessary. Europeans love to go to the United States. Whereas in India, we're never going to get Indians at any kind of scale to come all the way to North America to do something. So there, it's really clear about establishing a Summer Research Institute there. So it's different in each thing, and I think that it's, for Asia, what we've got to do is we've got to develop relationships with potential partners here, and then start talking with them and figuring out what makes sense. We're very, very sensitive to not being North Americans that seem to know how to do things in other environments. We're having a hard time keeping up with North America ourselves.
I know he was here just a month ago.
Who's that?
Diego.
Yeah, that's right.
Was that just to scout this area out and stuff, or for partnerships? Or?
Did he have any meetings here that you know of? Or?
He was at Hong Kong U, I think. He gave a couple talks there.
Yeah, he's scouting things out. He's in Europe right now. His wife actually works for United, so she's based here. So he's got nexus to Hong Kong as well.
All right, great. Once again, I'd like to thank the Robert Ho Foundation for bringing Adam here, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending this kind of wonderful discussion. If you're interested in these areas, I think in December we're organizing we're actually hosting TEDx Hong Kong, which the registration will be going up any day now. We're also hosting Humanity Plus, which is a little bit different from this, but different ideas on the future. And we're also planning the Asia Consciousness Festival, also that will be running in December. And if you're interested in those, we've got a mailing email collection, and then you can contact Kelly Larson here as well too. So once again, I'd like to thank Adam, and all right.